Mira of Mira's Worlds, and in this video we're going to talk about Middle English, and I'm going to provide you with a very basic Middle English primer. What is Middle English? It's the written and spoken language of England from approximately the year 1100 to the year 1500. The important thing to keep in mind is that spoken language moves much more quickly than written language, so it's possible that Middle English is actually older than the year 1100 and that it not died out, but it ended sooner than the 1500s. We only have the written records to go on. Obviously, we can't go back in time and speak to anybody who was actually speaking Middle English. Usage varied widely by time and place. That's the important thing to keep in mind, that different parts of Middle English are going to read and sound very different because people were living in different parts of the country and in different centuries. In the 1470s, William Caxton wrote a very famous piece about how people in one part of England could not understand people in another part of England when they were trying to buy eggs. And definitely a word like egg seems like it would be pretty universal, or at least the same word all throughout the country. But even in the 1400s, people were divided by a language. Famous poets like Geoffrey Chaucer and Gower wrote in the London dialect, which is the easiest for most modern English speakers to read because the London dialect is what eventually became the standard dialect. So we Americans speak a version of what Chaucer was speaking and writing in the 1300s. Other writings can be a little more difficult to read, especially for present-day English speakers. The thing is that it's not necessary to read Middle English, either to read the original documents, or of course there are many wonderful translations of Chaucer and other Middle English writers. But it is helpful to understand the rhyme scheme, and personally I just think Middle English is actually really beautiful sounding. Dr. Tara Williams wrote that if you can read misspelled words, you can read Middle English, so to that end you might not actually need this primer or any other instruction. Princeton's John Fleming wrote that it is of course possible to read Chaucer in a modernized text, just as it is possible to take a bath with your socks on. So make of that what you will. Maybe it's important to read Middle English so that you can truly get a sense of what Chaucer and the other writers were going for. Personally, I think anytime anybody is reading any text is a reason to celebrate, whether you're reading it in translation or not. Now, you might be wondering, how can we know what Middle English sounded like? And the truth is, we don't. What I'm going to tell you is based largely on conjecture and what I've learned in my courses. Certainly, I could be wrong, or information could have changed 100 years from now. Maybe we'll know something different. We can guess how words sounded based on rhyme schemes, such as what Chaucer was writing, and we can see how words rhymed. And you can do this even to Shakespeare and other later writers too. If you read it in a modern accent, it doesn't make sense, but if you think about how the words rhymed, it makes more sense. Also, people tended to write as they spoke, so we can get a sense of how people were actually pronouncing their names. And really, that's not that different from modern English, present-day English. But ultimately, we can't know 100%, so don't watch this video and then step into a time machine and expect to be able to converse with natives of the 1200s. So let's talk about basic Middle English pronunciation. The absolute key is to pronounce every letter. There are no silent letters in Middle English. So no weird silent E's, no silent GHs. In words like night or knee, you pronounce that K and N. Kelly Griffiths, another professor of mine, once pointed out that in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the silly French antagonists were actually onto something by pronouncing words as knicht instead of night. GH and WH are very common consonant clusters in Middle English, and they're kind of a breathy sound, the aspirated H, so g and hua instead of wa and g. In English, we like to slur our letters together. That's called eliding. Many other languages don't do that. Words that end in ION have two syllables, so you would pronounce it as eon. So instead of decision, decision, kind of a French sound. Roll your R's, so If you have taken Spanish or other languages like that, it'll be a little bit easier. The S is soft. There aren't many Z sounds in Middle English. And Middle English has long and short vowels. Now, we have that in present day English too, but when we learn about long and short vowels in school, we learn about them in a context of a short A is and a long A is A. And a short I is and a long I is I. That's not how long and short vowels work for most languages. Instead, it literally just means the amount of time you spend pronouncing that letter. So a short A would be ah, and a long A would be ah. So often that's represented by two A's to get that sense across, especially since we've kind of lost it in present day English. There's also a letter you might encounter called the yod, which is not really an analog in modern and present day English because it can represent a GH sound, it can represent a J, it can represent a W, a G, or a Y. Yod is often represented by the numeral 3 in texts or by a kind of strange looking Y. So give me a sec here and I'll put this image up and you can see both of these symbols can represent yod. Now, my favorite aspect of Middle English is something called the Great Vowel Shift, which probably occurred in the 1300s. So again, we can't be sure. If you've ever studied another Indo-European language like Spanish or French or German, you've probably noticed that their vowels sound different. In English, we say A, E, I, O, U. But in continental languages, Romance languages, you say A, E, O, U. Now, why is that different? Well, in Old English, that is how we pronounced our vowels. But at some time, there was a great vowel shift, and we went from saying ah to a. What happened is that probably one vowel changed, and then to avoid confusion, the others also shifted. We don't know when this occurred or why. One theory is that perhaps a nobleman started doing it that way and everybody copied him. It's hard to say. So that's why we have those different sounds, and honestly just using the more Romance vowels when you're reading Middle English will make it sound correctly, even if you ignore all of the other rules. I hope this helps you a little bit with your Middle English. Definitely check out Chaucer and other medieval writings. They're beautiful and a joy to read, and again, even if you read it in translation, I think that's a wonderful thing.